Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for today's SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. I'm your host, Marty Bennett, and today on the Roundup, we're going to be covering 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. Before we get to those questions, I do want to give a special shout out to those watching live here on Facebook and those taking the time to watch on repeat either on Facebook or our YouTube channel, and also those who make a conscious effort to download our podcast, subscribing to it, and listening to our words each week on our 3 different topics that we cover and hope to answer to provide some insight for you in your daily work. So let's get to it. As you know, each week we take a look at the news stories of the week that have come down in international education and social media, and we look at ways that potentially we see themes developing in some of these news stories, and how that might be shaped to provide some insight onto these topics that can help you do your jobs better. And we provide that in a newsletter form each week on Monday mornings at 9 a.m. in a newsletter called All the SMIE News Fit to Share. That stands for Social Media and International Ed News. We usually have 5 to 6 social media stories, 20 to 30 international education stories each week that we highlight in different topic areas. And we see themes developing, and we present 3 of those topics on Wednesdays for our live chats here on Facebook for the Midweek Roundup. So if you haven't already subscribed, I certainly recommend doing so. You can get the free subscription at smieconsulting.org/subscribe. Just enter your email address and some other details, and we'll get you added to that mailing list for the weekly newsletter. But today, let's get right to it. It's Wednesday, March 3rd. The Biden administration has been in office for a little over 6 weeks now, and we're coming to a point in our time where we see some signs that things might be changing in a more positive directions. We've seen some data from Common App that shows that international applications are up, aside from China, where they're down considerably still. Do we see other areas of life in terms of the government's attitude towards international changing? Certainly seems to be that way, and we're going to talk about that in our first question of the day. And how should we encourage international students about study options in the United States? What policies, and we've talked in the last couple of weeks about some of the immigration plans that the administration has and some of the components that will impact international education in a positive way. What we're also going to talk about today is the way we talk about international education here in the U.S., what we can be doing, and 2 very clear ways that we can make a difference as a country and as international educators in how we talk about students themselves. So let's get right to it. First up is actually a Forbes article that covers the topic related to words that are used to talk about international students, immigrants to the United States, all of that. I think it seems like a pretty basic one and maybe even a simplistic one, but the impact of such a move, I think, by the Biden administration this week to change the way we talk as a nation in terms of, from the government level in particular, about people who are here in the United States without documents, who had previously been called aliens or illegals, or I think illegals had gone out within the last 10 years and was replaced by undocumented. Now, even undocumented might not be appropriate or not. We're calling them non-citizens. That's something, the language and the approach taken by the administration certainly softens the way we talk about that. And aliens always seem to be a very unusual choice to talk about those that are not citizens of the United States or permanent residents. I was an alien here in the United States at one point. I was a resident alien, which is another interesting term, before I became a citizen. This is something that when you think about the way we talk about each other, our language has changed in how we reference certainly different ethnicities changed as we have become more user-friendly, frankly, in terms of our language choices, and I think this is a step in that direction when it comes to immigrants and those that are coming here for temporary periods of time for study or other purposes, and how what the words we use do matter. And I think that was my point this week in the post that I've seen a lot of traction on various platforms in terms of response from audience members, and that seems to be the lion's share of agreement that, hey, words do matter, and how we talk about as a government and officially as a government talking about future immigrants, future students coming to this country as aliens, as illegals and illegal aliens, those types of things. That language is going away as far as government speak goes, and that's a good thing. And I think that matters, particularly for overseas audiences, that when they learn the meaning of a word in English, whether something is or someone is a particular category like an alien, does that really, when they think of alien, they don't think of someone who's come to another country. They think of someone from another planet. And that's almost the way it seems we have treated international students in the past, how we've certainly treated potential immigrants from certain countries in the past by the previous administration. It was like they were coming from a different planet. So I think this language change matters, and I think it certainly is more of an encouragement when we talk about people as non-citizens or language that is certainly much more friendly. So if you have a subscription to Forbes, you'd be able to see that. But if you don't, you won't be able to read it, unfortunately. But I think it's a policy move by the government that does make a lot of sense, and certainly ones that presents a kinder, gentler face to U.S. as a welcoming destination for international students. So certainly wasn't one of the things that was front of the administration's talking points and how they were going to view immigration issues, but certainly it's a welcome one. I think we would all agree that in our field that for too many years the way the government has labeled people from overseas that would be coming to the U.S. Doesn't really present the best image. So the way we can talk about them now is in a much more user-friendly way. Certainly one that establishes a better, I think, welcoming approach and welcoming language for these prospective students. The other side of this coin is a question of how should we encourage international students. And I think this is an opinion piece in the Business Insider magazine, news outlet really, that talks about how international students should be granted more visas to study here. And of course, all of us in international ed said amen, and we all agree that yes, more visas, certainly a streamlined visa process, a visa process that potentially, if immigration regulations or recent legislation gets approved to make international students in F1 status dual intent, that would have a significant impact, and I think we would all be supportive of that. And the person writing this article is Christopher Richardson. He's a former consular officer and that's one of the first jobs you get as a consular officer on your first assignments overseas is to be a visa officer, where you spend 8 to 10 hours a day doing visa appointments. It's the real grunt work of the Foreign Service Corps in terms of what not everybody looks forward to, but certainly something everyone needs to do, because it's very much presenting that public face about the U.S. before these potential immigrants, non-immigrants come to the United States. They are meeting with a U.S. official, and when they go to an embassy or consulate and have that visa interview. And this former consular officer talks about his time at State Department and how he interviewed thousands of international students who wanted to study at some of the best universities in the U.S., and they were some of the most smartest and most successful students in their countries. In countries that the former president used very derogatory language regarding their countries. That Also talks about the Muslim ban and the negative impact that had, and 4 straight years of decline in student visa applications as a result. And that also leading to our competitors, Canada, Australia, saw their numbers increase. So he makes the argument that good visa policy is common sense, and that it is part of foreign policy and how you approach the world. And part of the Biden administration inaugural address says America is back. We are back engaging in the world. We know damage has been done. We're going to do what we can to repair that damage, repair relationships, rebuild alliances over the next 4 years. And that's certainly something that it is part of the soft diplomacy that we have and we use in the U.S. in terms of our higher education, much like China has done in a different way with their Belt and Road Initiative, soft power initiatives designed to curry favor with foreign governments, to allow better relations with the country that's providing the largesse. We do that. We have foreign aid, and we're the largest provider of foreign aid in the world, but it isn't an expectation that we have these students come, but certainly it's something we encourage. In the past, we've done much more than we did in the last 4 years to encourage it, and I think we're going to do much more in the next 4 years to encourage it. So the type of this consular officer makes the point that it's a very complicated process, and he says, and quoting him here, to even schedule an appointment requires a visa applicant to work through 3 to 5 different websites. Applicants must often trek hours or even days across their country to a U.S. embassy or consulate for an in-person interview. After being searched and fingerprinted in a heavily armed atmosphere, applicants interview with visa officers, such as myself, behind a bulletproof glass window for only a few minutes. There's often no privacy as applicants answer personal questions about their plans, income, criminal history, and family ties to their native country. Often, cases are placed in administrative processing in which the applicant can be pending for years without explanation. And that's just the student experience. He says, and provides some insight into the process. I think that's helpful for international educators to see. Those who have traveled abroad in the past and have visited consulates and embassies and met with these folks who do the interviews, you kind of get a sense of what their days are like if you've asked the questions. But he goes on to explain the process on his side as a consular officer. Officers in general, quote again, in general are drawn from the U.S. Diplomatic Corps. When they joined Foreign Service, most had dreams of being George Kennan, but instead they ended up on the line, where they are expected to interview as many as 120 visa applicants a day. And officers have little time to analyze applicants beyond anything but gut instinct, and that gut often leads them to deny credible applicants. So this is the former consul or current consular officer who's admitted this. Their guts tell them to deny. They often deny credible applicants. And it's an antiquated system, he goes on to say, that is rooted in post 9/11 security buildup. Sadly, the arrogance of those in government who believe that America is so appealing that we can treat visa applicants any way we wish without repercussions. And that's it. Immigration policy that relies on gut judgments from predominantly white visa officers and government officials who believe that America is so appealing. And that's certainly proving to be less true. While we may still be appealing, that we certainly should not be treating visa applicants any way we wish without repercussions. And that's certainly, there are negative stories. You hear about bad experiences with consular officers, and that can put off future students, but the desire to study here is so great. We don't capitalize on that, frankly, enough, particularly in the visa offices. And I think he's making the case here that certainly is not what happens at posts around the world. The lack of international travel for much of this year, which we are going to see, even though we might all have vaccinations here in the United States by May, enough, as President Biden said yesterday. That doesn't mean international travel is all of a sudden opened up, because we're still, as a country, coming to grips with how to deal with this. Though we'll have the vaccinations, other countries won't, and it may be months before they do. It's a very significant minority of Western Western countries, westernized countries, highly developed economy that have have rolled out very significant vaccination programs yet. So we're still months off before we see, probably 2022 before we see significant travel resume, maybe longer. His recommendation here is improving the pre-interview process, pre-appointment process. And that is certainly something that is, compared to our competitors, is a much more complicated process in the U.S. Second, he says we should seek ways to permit student visa applicants to renew their visas while in the U.S., so they don't have to return home in the middle of their studies. Third, we should create an empowered ombudsman office to elevate systemic and individual visa issues when merited. And those are things that, yeah, we'd all love that. NAFTA has ombudsmans that deal with these kind of relationships with states and with folks there, or DHS if it's more current student issues. But there's also a lot of red tape with the State Department. He advises cutting back on that. The processes that create unnecessary administrative processing backlogs, being more transparent to applicants as to why they're placed in administrative processing in the first place. So to have to put your life on hold for a year because you're waiting on a decision that you don't know why you're waiting on a decision, just other than it's administrative processing, that the administration should is one of the, obviously dollars make a difference here, that there should be increased, he makes the case Biden administration should work with Congress to secure more funding for State Department so they can expand visa interview waivers, invest in remote visa interview technology, like testing companies have been able to do it by having at-home versions of their exams, and provide better training for officers. There's a lot that's going on here, and he's making some fantastic points. I have dear friends, lifelong friends that have worked as foreign officers and have been on that front line as visa officers, and they share similar stories in terms of, yeah, it's grunt work. It's not the most, oftentimes the bureaucracy is just overwhelming in terms of why we have to do what we do, and some of the initial hurdles that students have to clear, like the immigrant intent piece, are so significant that when we can't give a visa and are using our gut instincts to make decisions, oftentimes those might not be the best decisions, and it doesn't take into consideration bigger picture issues. So really encouraged to see that kind of an article. And yes, we should be granting more visas to international students. We should be making the visa process simpler. Certainly it is with many of our competitors. So a lot of good recommendations in there, and I certainly recommend all taking a quick read on that article. Next up, what role can social media play in recruitment? And this is something that's near and dear to my heart, because it's an area that it's been around now for 2005, 2006, when social media first hit the scene in terms of on campus in the United States, and then growing dramatically around the world. Certainly during my time in Education USA from 2008 to 2014, social media just exploded globally, not just in the United States. And at different rates in different countries and different platforms, being more popular than others. But being aware of that and leveraging that has always been a challenge, I think, for U.S. institutions. But to show you how simple it can be, and I referenced this in one of my news articles this week that I posted out for the newsletter, is a simple thing. This is a video from Pasadena City College from one of their Korean students, done in Korean with English slides. Is basically recording a Zoom meeting he did, and that it's been repurposed for social. They probably did a live event, and he did it for prospective students. It's a little over 7 minutes, and it goes through his experiences going to talking about Pasadena City College, his experiences, what he's doing now, that type of thing. So it's all in Korean. The slides are English, but I think it's a very interesting take on what our institution can do to reach students, targeted students in key areas. Again, this was probably done live, but it was placed on by Education USA. Oh, it was targeting through Education USA Korea, students in that country, obviously. And this the video was actually released through Education USA Korea. But it really talks through some of the important examples of how something so simple can be, that might have been done live and attracted certain students on the day, has life well beyond that. And it's had 167 views. Again, we're talking about targeted audience here in Korea that are hearing this student talk about his experiences in the application process, maybe working with Education USA Korea as he was applying, all throughout that process, talking about Pasadena City College. All of this is something I think we really need to pay attention to as we are putting together our recruitment plans. Social media is how our students, prospective students, live their lives on their mobile devices, and how our current students certainly do. Might be different platforms, but that's part of the role of using social media on appropriate platforms to meet prospective students in their native language using current students. And this is something that ties together, as we've been talking about, the 6 P's of international enrollment management, strategic international enrollment management over the last few weeks. We'll keep on talking about that for the next few months. But it's my model that I've developed that talks about the importance of perspective, of planning, of platform choice, of peers, and of personalization in how you do what you do. And this is something that I think a lot of institutions know they need to do, but don't ever commit the resources to doing it, the time and effort of having a current student do a presentation like this to an advising center. Even if they only have 5 students that attend the live session, you can repurpose this and should repurpose this kind of content across platforms, because it can have a value add beyond the initial event, and will always have a value add if you know how to use it and where to leverage it. And that's part of the challenge, is knowing where you need to be and living where your audiences live, which I always talk about too. And we talk about this in a new scheme of how institutions in this time in our history, when race issues have bubbled to the surface and have been receiving, rightly so, a lot of public attention in terms of how we message, how we talk about ourselves. Immigration issues that have been largely front and center for the last 4 or 5 years, and how those messages are talked about in wider circles in the world, in student communities that we may or may not be tapped into. It's important that our messaging, though we are sensitive to what other people are concerned about. And that's always kind of marketing 101, is talking about issues that, using issues that your audiences have and care about, and talking about how you are addressing some of these issues, social issues of our day, and using, in this case, social media to get that message across. Great article by Net Natives I'll be posting the link to on the Facebook page. It was also in the newsletter this week, that talks about the kind of steps you need to take and the importance of awareness of what you're doing to what you're doing to address certain issues, social issues of the day. That trade that in the awareness that you have there, that becomes acceptance for who you are as a brand, as an institution. And it's something that I think the more institutions that do this as part of the regular programming, it's not going to be talking about your admissions process. It's not going to be talking about scholarships on your campus. It's not going to be always touting mission and values of the institution, unless it's, again, particularly in this case, when you can tie mission and values of an institution to how you address social issues of the day on your campus, using that as kind of the color commentary for what your institution is all about, and how you put your words into action, and make it something that is showing your campus's awareness of issues, but also acceptance that these are things that we need to be talking about as an educational institution. So this article from Net Natives talks about curating your own creators. where all the big brands on Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Pinterest, whatever it might be, have curated teams of creators that they are encouraging to create unique, original content. For institutions, this means using your current students to help address the issues of the day on the platforms that your future students and future potential audiences are on. And that means allowing them the freedom to address the issues on how your campus is talking about race on campus, how your college handles issues of the day as we're in the middle of a pandemic safety, that kind of thing. That's using your current students is using those peers again, as we just alluded to, how important that is in the overall mix. And let it be organic, frankly, and try to, even though you want to be micromanaging some of the comments and all that, let the conversation develop. Don't feel like you have to be engaged in absolutely every comment. And it's important to use storytelling in this process and having a presence and talking about issues of the day and allowing your students to talk about your institution and how your institution is meeting those needs or addressing those issues of the day. I think that's a way social media can really be a powerful force in getting your message across, not just of the end goal of enrolling those students, but what your institution stands for, what you prioritize, and what you are looking for in future students who are maybe looking at your campus, those that have that kind of broader perspective and are inclusive and engaging in with the different communities that exist on your campus. Communities that in their home countries, many of these students might not know anything about, but it's making them aware of what is going on campus, and that's never a bad thing, frankly, to be open and honest with your prospective audiences. Now, final story today is we're going to shift gears, go across the Atlantic to an article from The Boar out of the UK that is entitled "COVID Recession May Force Universities to Cut Overseas Fees." Now, this is something that's interesting. This is, we talked, and certainly last fall, the UK was seen as probably the biggest winner in a pandemic-filled year in terms of enrollments, admission rates, that type of thing. Even though they have struggled in the UK, perhaps not quite as badly as we had early on in the pandemic with managing it and getting things under control and keeping rates down. They had their own struggles there in the UK and still are to some extent, but vaccinations rolling out pretty quickly there, more so there than in other places in Europe. And what's happened in the UK is they've been seen as a winner. Why? Because they kept their borders open. Their visa processing systems did not shut down nearly completely like they did in the United States, where 90% of our visa consulates and embassies were closed for student visa appointments up through August and September, which are peak season times for students to be coming to the U.S., other than a few emergency appointment only places. So that was a problem we had in the U.S. We still were able to take in students, though not in the numbers that we were expected, down 43% this past fall. But the UK kept their borders open for the most part, had visa systems still running, and as a result, their enrollments were much better than expected this fall. Now, part of that reasoning is the competitors. You look at what happened in Australia. They're still closed and are likely to be closed to new internationals for much of 2021. So that will be almost 2 academic years that new international students haven't been able to enroll physically. Returning students who were locked out of the country, many of them haven't been able to return either. New Zealand, same deal. We're talking the end of 2021 before international students can return new or returning to New Zealand. China, same way. But for Australia and New Zealand, as prime competitors for the UK, US, Canada, they have certainly suffered. Canada has suffered too. After March, they would not let anyone new into the country who didn't have a visa that was issued beforehand or study permit for Canada. They then changed that to allow to make it actually a little bit more strict than even the U.S. had, that if your campus did not require you to be physically in Canada, you would not be let in, even if you had a valid visa. So Canada has taken a hit. They've reopened and had visas available since October, study permits available since October, but only if their institutions had submitted COVID readiness plans that were then approved by the government. So that was a slower process that got bogged down in bureaucracy and prevented a lot of institutions enrolling numbers in the late fall, early spring. That seems to be of ameliorated, and there seems to be moves to being much more open by the time the next academic year starts in August, September. But within the UK, they're talking about issues where they had a window this past year because of what happened in Australia and New Zealand, other countries that had limited intakes, that as a result to remain attractive and competitive with their peer countries internationally, they're going to need to think about cutting overseas fees. They're already dealing with this somewhat when they're talking about EU students who previously had kind of home tuition rates that UK students paid, EU students paid, but that's no longer the case. So there's a potential group of EU students that might not be looking at the UK anymore because of the increased price. So many UK universities are looking at schemes to provide what we would do in the US, kind of an out-of-state tuition waiver, to that difference between in-state and out-of-state, or home fees and non-home fees, to have scholarships in place to still attract students from the EU that many UK institutions depend on. So that's already in play for some UK universities. And now on top of it, this expert here is indicating that they will need to look at different models that allow students to do a year in their home country through transnational education, perhaps, and then come to home campus to finish the program. It might be something where they have to reduce fees to stay competitive, to attract students that might have been looking at Australia or New Zealand or even the U.S. or Canada in order to keep them coming to the UK. So again, this all goes to the perspective issue that I've talked about for the last few months about how important it is for U.S. institutions to be aware of what's going on in other countries, because as this article points out, what institutions should be driven by is very much an awareness of how competitive or not they will be in future months when it comes to student intakes. So a lot to digest, obviously, this week. Thanks for bearing with us on the Roundup. It's always a pleasure to be having these conversations with you, and we look forward to chatting with you again in the weeks and months to come. So have a wonderful day. Cheers.